Hi, my name is Adam and I'm here again with my friend Shaun, and today we are going to be figuring out the festivals. Shaun, what on earth do we do with all these festivals?
So the festivals we have in mind to talk about would be ones that are embraced by the mainstream,
Right.
Generally speaking. And within those, there can be elements where the church joins in because they have something to do with Christendom, but there would be problematic elements. So we would think of festivals like Easter, Christmas, even something like Lent, and then to the end of the spectrum, Halloween.
Yes.
And I think to different degrees, there are, you could describe some as generally useful, but with problematic elements, and to the end of the spectrum, completely problematic.
Right.
And so we find that these things are quite divisive, actually.
Yes.
Because celebrating them is an open and public thing.
Right.
None of them are just celebrated in the privacy of your home or in secret. And so one of our battles is to, okay, how much allowance do we give each other, and how much do we kind of say, well, let's just bear with one another in love?
Yes.
And how much do we say, well, brother, do you realize what a problem this is? Do you realize what this is doing? Do you realize the history of this? And so, if we start with something like Easter, that would be in the category of generally, well, we are told to celebrate the death and resurrection of Jesus.
Right. I mean, the one thing Jesus said to do in remembrance of him was to take the bread and take the cup, and to, as often as you eat of it and drink of it, do it in remembrance of him until he comes again. Remember his death until he comes. So I think if Easter focuses on the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus, and that's its major focus, then that's a healthy thing to do. It's a healthy celebration. But it does come with other elements.
Yes.
At some point.
Fluffy elements.
Small fluffy elements, whether they be of the rabbity nature or the small chickenish nature. Chickens before they stop being cute and suddenly become creepy.
Yes.
Or KFC. So there's the chocolatey element to Easter that we'd need to consider. And are these things inherently evil?
Yeah.
Oh, they are.
No, I'm agreeing with the statement. So you'd have to say that the church doesn't have the option of sitting this out. We're not going to observe Easter. We're not interested.
Right.
Generally speaking, that time of the year is a time where the church does leverage what is happening in order to reach people, in order to ourselves and our families. So let's think about this, whether or not it was the exact time of the year it happened, but we've earmarked that date along with everybody else. And then I think within that you would say, you might have fun with your children with the Easter eggs or something, but you would sit them down and say, an Easter egg has nothing to do with this. We're having a treat today. But you might explain the Greek Orthodox origins of an egg and new life, and he's risen indeed. But ultimately you would be able to kind of ignore the peripheral and in a sense laugh it off, but really focus on the main aspect of it.
And I think as a church, you'd need to have a sober judgment, perhaps is a good phrase, over what you endorse as a church as opposed to as an individual. Because this is one of those areas, I think there's a good precedent when Paul talks about meat offered to idols. And he goes through that long discussion about if it's right for you, then it's okay for you. But if it's not okay for your friend, it's not okay for them. But then also there's a responsibility on me if I'm someone of what he would call greater faith in this regard, that I feel the grace more than my friend, that I don't cause my friend to stumble. So that even though I regard him as sort of having weaker faith, that almost I align myself with him. Because I think as church leaders, we do need to be mindful of that, that it's wonderful to celebrate Jesus. It's great to do that at Easter time. It may even be okay to hand out some chocolate at church. I'm not saying that's sin, but I think if we have the service run by the Easter Bunny, then maybe
he's not qualified.
Maybe we've crossed the line.
Yes.
Yeah, and maybe we've swung an emphasis which is going to become a stumbling block for some people who actually feel very strongly on these things. And because obviously the Easter Bunny and stuff, that's all pagan origins and things that came before. I think maybe it bears saying at this point, all these festivals had, well, maybe not Lent, but Easter, Christmas, and Halloween all have components that are from the church and components that come actually from usually European paganism. And so in the case of Easter, some of the animal life that comes into the festival is not of Christian origin. And so people, if they're going to struggle with that as a church leader, I think it would be important to be mindful and to go, you know what, do we need to embrace that aspect when we could just embrace Christ and make it about him? And then we know we're on solid ground. On Christ, the solid rock I stand. All other ground is sinking sand, never more pertinent than at Easter.
Yes.
And I think maybe that's an important way to look at it.
Yeah. And so if you go towards something like Lent, which is also a fairly clear-cut concept of denying yourself something, going through a period of fasting, generally it will be health reasons. People will give up something and it will be healthy for them. You can't find fault with fasting. You can't find fault with Paul said, I beat my body into submission. I'm going to make it my slave. What would you foresee as a caution for observing that or trying to get others to observe it? Would you see any flags there to say, well, let's think about this?
Like you say, I think fasting's good. Jesus talked about fasting being a private thing. So maybe not something to mark our bodies and display to the world that we're in a place of fasting, because that feels a little bit like praying on the street corners that Jesus cautioned us against. Obviously within the body, within the family, within the house, like we all know we're fasting at the same time. If sometimes in the course of normal church life, our church leaders might go, we're going to fast for the next 3 days or the next 7 days, and everyone knows everyone's fasting. I don't think that's what Jesus was addressing. I think the idea of being a public faster who would mark himself as someone on a fast, and maybe in your church, in your office environment at work, you're going, I'm sorry, I can't have that, I'm on my fast.
Yes.
And it almost becomes a thing of identity. I think that's what Christ was addressing there. And he was saying, don't parade your piety in front of the others.
Yes.
Let it be a personal thing so that it can have a personal consequence.
Yes.
And it can be transformative. Fasting should be transformative. It should be about a connection with God. It should be about finding him in a deeper and new way. It's not about what we parade.
Yes.
So we don't do it for earthly applause.
Yes.
And so maybe that would be the only caution there. I think, like you say, fasting is great. We should fast.
And so as we move on to Christmas would be the one where we now start to get to quite problematic aspects and quite divisive even within the Christian faith for different reasons. I mean, what's your experience been with Christmas?
Well, I mean, I grew up without Christmas. My family didn't celebrate at all. And so, you know, full disclosure. It was convenient. My mother's birthday was the 23rd of December. So we'd often have a large meal then and be given presents. But we didn't celebrate on the 25th. And in fact, it was a very normal day. We often wouldn't even have a special meal. And we were raised to not believe in Father Christmas, who, for those at home, is not real. You know...
So I need to make a phone call.
You know, it's just one of those things. Like, at the end of the day, what had happened was my parents had heard some teaching by a wonderful Bible teacher, David Pawson, who had laid out why he didn't celebrate Christmas and didn't feel it was a good response to the Bible and to Christ. And so they took that on. I then married someone who had grown up completely the opposite. And so I had to find for myself, instead of just inheriting now from my parents a particular stance, I had to wrestle that through for myself and go, well, what actually here for me is conviction? And so what I found was, okay, like with Easter, actually the primary thing here is how can I exercise grace towards my wife, towards her family? If I come into someone's house, okay, what I do in my house, whether I have a tree or not, that's up to me. But if I come into their house and I have a tree and I struggle to fellowship with them because I'm looking at this tree like I'm twitching during eggnog or whatever, that's not cool.
Yeah.
Like, I need to find grace for those with me.
Yes.
But like Easter, there's aspects to Christmas that come from the church, and there's aspects to Christmas, and probably in the case of Christmas, far more aspects that come from European pagan traditions. And so many of the festivities that are now being associated with Christmas that came in through Sometimes as recently as the Victorian era, things like the Christmas tree and stuff being popularized by Prince Albert, different things like that. That actually these are the things that we know from Dickens and from the Christmas cards and the pictures, and even the sort of Coca-Cola Santa Claus in the red suit, which was a development through the advertising industry of the traditional St. Nicholas. These things, I think that those are areas where you have to go, well, what does this add to my celebration of Jesus? Can I do this knowing that before God I'm not participating in a pagan practice? Can I celebrate Jesus and still point my children to Jesus through this?
Yes.
It's not wrong to have nice food.
Yes.
It's not wrong to give each other presents. I think these are beautiful things, and we do see in the nativity story, though of course technically it didn't happen so close as the shepherds' arrival, that there were wise men who came and offered gifts to a now slightly older Jesus in a house, as opposed to where he was born. But I mean, you can bring in these elements if you want to talk about gift giving, and that it's better to give than to receive. I mean, that's something that children need to learn. And often learn at birthdays and Christmas. When their sibling is getting a present and they're not, like those sort of things. It's important that kids learn that stuff. But is it important that, again, I think as churches, we have grace for those who would struggle to celebrate?
Yes.
Just as much as we need to extend grace to those who wish to celebrate. That as a church, if I'm a leader in a church, am I making decisions that are going to make it hard for those who choose not to celebrate to participate with faith?
Yes.
Or as a leader, am I going to make it difficult? Am I going to heap condemnation on those who feel there's grace for them to celebrate? Because this isn't something laid out for us in the scriptures.
Yes.
We're not given Christmas in scripture.
Yes, we're never told to honor or recognize the birth of Jesus.
We don't even have a birthday in the Bible. It's not like they marked it for us. In fact, if we look at the priestly records from the Old Testament, we work out when Zechariah was in the temple. We can work out the birth dates for Elizabeth and John the Baptist. We know that Jesus was probably born in September. So obviously the date we've been given is from the Roman calendar. And it connects with the church festivals and also connects with pagan festivals in the northern hemisphere. Which is also interesting for those of us watching this in the southern hemisphere. Christmas is a very different thing anyway.
Yes, very much. Very much. And there's the disagreement on Christmas is valid because of, I think the more you read about it and what is done and what in the name of what it should be, the more unsettling it is. The more you read about the history, the more you think of the traditions associated with it. I think of songs like Away in a Manger, the little Lord Jesus, no crying he makes. And Jesus wept as an adult. But he didn't cry as a baby. He just lay there like this little alien, just totally removed from any human emotion.
Lying in a manger.
So there's aspects of it that are frankly quite ludicrous. And yet in the middle of it, you do have the narrative of God, the incarnation. You have that in there, enough to say, well, there's something here for us to think about. There's something here for us to observe and to take a moment and sit with our families. Even within the questions of what things were used for, none of us question why there was a tree, why there was a log, why there was this and this. And a historian will freak you out completely by telling you what they were used for back then. But then we've got to the pure, all things are pure in Scripture. And certainly it being reasonable to say, well, we can take these things. There are many household things that were used for many purposes. We take them today and say, well, I'm using it as a decoration. I'm using it as something that it's in my use of it. It's not anything close to approximating what they wanted to use it for, which is not the same with Halloween. And that would be the furthest end of the spectrum, where we're not just dealing with something that was that in the past. There are things being invoked now that are still very sinister. Very sinister.
But again, like with Easter and with Christmas, there's a component here that comes to us from church history, and then there's aspects of paganism that have been laid on top. And in this case, it's been very much where if with Easter there's this much of the church and this much of the pagan, and with Christmas it's perhaps a half-half that's decreasing in the Christ-like, But with Halloween, there's almost nothing left of what had been a church. And so many people wouldn't maybe even know that there was this festival within the Roman Church. They have festivals for all the saints, and then they have All Saints' Day for all the saints that are left over, because there's only 365 days in the year. Yeah. And so you have All Saints' Day, and the day after was the Day of the Dead. And so All Saints is on the 31st, and then All Hallows, no, get that the other way around. All Saints' Day is the first. Mm. So All Hallows, as in all the holy, all the saints, All Hallows Eve becomes the night before. Mm. And there's other traditions that have come out of the Roman Church that have to do with like the Day of the Dead and these sort of things, the mask wearing, the skulls and those sort of things. But that all ties in just so very nicely with the already existing pagan traditions of celebrating the dead and that existed in Europe and in other parts of the world at that time. It's just being a dark pagan season. And so with Easter, maybe it's for the peripherals that come in from the pagan. With the Christmas, we find almost like a half and half mix. With Halloween, it's just so dark. And
you almost can't separate.
You almost can't see any light in it. Yeah. And so the question becomes, like, as a church, do we even acknowledge it? Like, what business has darkness with light? You know, and that. But at the same time, some people have argued, well, maybe we should have a light party instead of a darkness party, and those sort of things. I don't know. Would you throw a light party? Maybe I'm putting you on the spot.
I don't think I would personally. I would prefer just to ignore rather than try. In a sense, you legitimize it by trying to create something that's the opposite. To what end? I would think, why do you have to even, what's the point of trying to create something that's opposite? You just leave it where it is. Right. For me, that's a separation, as opposed to trying to come up with an equivalent because we've got to do something. We don't have to do anything.
Because the argument is, it's for the children, you know, and I mean, that's probably the thing that's caused the corrupting of so many hearts over the years regarding all these festivals. Oh, it's for the children. Yes. So like, do we have a bunny at church? Well, it's for the children. Do we have Santa Claus handing out presents at church? Well, it's for the children. Yes. And I think there is something that, how are we going to raise our children? Yes. Are we going to raise them believing the scriptures, holding to truth? Yes. Actually, are we going to raise them to be strong enough that when the world appears to be having fun, we can stand aside and not participate? Because they're going to need that strength when they become an adult. Yes. Or when they're a high schooler, when they're in college, varsity, they're going to need the strength to know that they can watch the world having fun and not participate because it's not righteous, because it's not what they should be doing. I think Halloween is a great training ground for that. Like all the other kids in the neighborhood are collecting candy. Yeah. What's my kid going to do? Yeah. Well, he's going to not sit in judgment, because we don't judge the world for being the world, but he is going to have to learn that there's a place of righteousness, there's a place of maybe peace with God, that of good conscience, where I can go with good conscience, I can't participate in this thing. Yes. A celebration of darkness. And some people said, no, but it's not. I dress my kids as a spaceman and a cowboy. Yes. But there's a sense in which, but why? Yes. You're doing that because the whole world is celebrating Halloween. Yes. So like you said, have you associated yourself just because you participated, even however benignly you feel you've participated? But again, the Bible doesn't give us this. So it has things like what partnership does darkness have with light, or light with darkness? And so we really do have to kind of wrestle these things with our conscience and with the scriptures. Yes. Would
you feel confident enough to say to a brother in the faith or sister in the faith, I'm concerned that you are participating in this. I don't question your own love for God, but I'm concerned that you are unwittingly associating yourself with something that could be very damaging.
That would certainly be my personal position. Yeah. I don't know that I would want to put that on other leaders to have as their own position. But as a leader myself, I would challenge a brother and say, like, if they're going to a fancy dress Halloween costume party or something, I might say to them, why?
Why this night?
Why this night? If you like dress up, go to Comic-Con. You know, like, if you like dress up, there's other outlets for enjoying dress up. You know, like, ultimately, it's like, who told you tonight you had to dress up? Who's become the Lord of this evening? Because actually, Halloween is about celebrating the Lord of the Dead. That's actually the festival, the pagan festival it comes from. So who was the Lord of your decision-making this evening? Who told you to dress up? Who told you to collect sweets? Who told you to be a black cat or whatever you are? I think for me, that's where it comes to an issue of lordship. In all the festivals, it's an issue of lordship, which is why with Easter, with Christmas, if we can make it about Jesus, then I think maybe we haven't erred. With Halloween, how do we make that about Jesus? It never even was. It was about All Saints, which is something within the Protestant tradition we don't even celebrate.
Yeah.
We do still celebrate Jesus' birth and his death and resurrection.
And so that would be quite a clear-cut one. And I think where we would land personally between you and I would be for the other ones to say there's Christian freedom and there's freedom of conscience.
Yeah.
And we have the Holy Spirit and we have the ability to divide between what is helpful, unhelpful.
Yeah.
And within that, we should bear with one another.
Yeah. In fact, Colossians 2:16 says, let no one pass judgment on you regarding festivals and new moons and Sabbaths. And there is a freedom we find in the New Testament, whereas the Hebrews had certain things in place regarding festivals that had to be celebrated at certain times, the Sabbath that had to be that Saturday through to the Sunday. New moons, they would have feasting on the new moons. I mean, actually, it sounds like a party, you know what I mean? Like, and feast every new moon, that's not such a bad idea. But coming into the new covenant, we're told, let no one pass judgment on you for those things. Because what was happening was the church was integrating with the Gentile world. You had Jewish believers and Greek believers, and then sort of Southern European believers, Roman believers, and suddenly the net was spreading, and no one had these Jewish traditions. And so did the Christians have to become Jews to be good Christians? And we have issues like the circumcision. But actually the thing was, no, you don't have to become a Jew to become a good Christian. You just have to come to Christ. You have to receive him as your Lord. You have to allow his life to fill your life. You have to be baptized into him. So you're baptized into his death, his burial, his resurrection, but you're not baptized into the festival of the new moon. You're not baptized into the Passover or the Feast of Tabernacles. You're not baptized into those things. You're baptized into Christ. I think for us as the church, when we look at festivals, we're baptized into Christ. Whatever is of Christ, whatever raises him up in our consciousness, whatever raises him up in the public consciousness, we can look to and see good in. But anything that's not of Christ, we're not baptized into that. It doesn't belong to us and we don't belong to it. And that's kind of where I'd land.
Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of Be Equipped. Please like and subscribe in order to get access to more resources.